हरिः ओम् नमः सर्वेभ्यः। अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इत्यस्य अद्य 30 पाठः। अस्मिन् वर्गे विप्रतिषेधस्य अध्ययनं कुर्मः। शुक्लाम्बरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। येनाक्षरसमाम्नायम् अधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयम्। अस्माकं वर्गस्य द्वे प्रयोजने अष्टाध्याय्याः आहत्य चतुश्शतस्य सूत्राणां व्याख्यासहितम् उदाहरणसहितं च अध्ययनं, तथा च अष्टाध्याय्याः प्रथमाध्यायस्य प्रथमपादस्य कण्ठस्थीकरणम्. So before we start the discussion of Vipratishedha, that is the topic of the today's class, let's answer some of the questions that were asked on the group, and then let's also quickly revise the Asiddhatva concept that was discussed yesterday. So there was a question actually that was asked last week on the group, and I missed replying it. So I thought it's important to discuss that. So the question was about the it property, it gunadharma of the Pratipadikas. And the question went something like this, that the person was looking at the word vidvas, and then somehow they found out that the vidvas word is called ugita, which means it is a word that consists of uk letter, either u or ru, I, una, ru, luka. So either u or ru, one of those letters as its samyaka. So uk ita yasmin saha ugita. So the obvious question was, how is this vidvas word ugita? So first of all, Pratipadikas, we mentioned that their Upadesha is not done, so they do not have an Itsamnya. And even if there was a hypothetical Itsamnya, one might believe that Sakara might get Itsamnya by Halantyam. But where is this Ukara or Rukara coming from, where it is giving that Ugita property to Vidvas? So this is actually an important question, and this was a little advanced when we studied Itsamnya class, so I did not explain that. But now that the question has come, let's talk about that. Let's spend a few minutes in understanding that. So when we discussed the Pratipadikas, the question is specific to Pratipadikas. So let's talk about Pratipadikas. So when we discussed Pratipadikas, we mentioned that Pratipadikas are of two types: Avyutpanna Pratipadikas and Vyutpanna Pratipadikas. Now, when it comes to Vyutpanna Pratipadikas, these Vyutpanna Pratipadikas are created by adding a pratyaya to either some other Pratipadika or to some dhatu. So, for example, when you add, say, aniyar pratyaya to the dhatu patha, you get pathaniya, which is a Vyutpanna Pratipadika made from the dhatu. Similarly, when you say apply a Tadhita pratyaya say iya to Dasharatha, you get Dasharathi, which is yet another Vyutpanna Pratipadika created from the another Pratipadika. So far so good. However, what happens is that some of these pratyayas which are added to that dhatu or to that Pratipadika, some of these pratyayas have special itsamyaka varnas in the Pratipadikas. So here is an example. व्युत्पन्न प्रातिपदिकानां निर्माणं धातोः प्रातिपदिकात् वा प्रत्ययस्य योजनेन संभवति. So for example, patha plus shatru becomes pathata, gama plus ktavatu becomes gatavata, buddhi plus matupa becomes buddhimata, and specifically talking about that vidvas word, vida dhatu plus shatru pratyaya, which is converted to another adesha called vasu, you get the vidvas pratipadika. Now, if you closely look at all these pratyayas have itsamyaka letters sitting inside them. So, for example, ktavatu has an ukara, which is itsamyaka. Ktavatu also has a kakara, which is itsamyaka. Matup has a pakara, which is itsamyaka. And matup also has ukara, anunasika ukara, which is itsamyaka. Same for shatru. There is a rukara, which is itsamyaka. And then there is a shakara, la shakvatadhite. That sutra gives its samya to the shakara. Now, obviously, the assumption over here is that the itsamyaka varnas are not placed by Panini Maharshi without any reason. So each itsamyaka varna must have a specific reason for which it is added in that particular pratyaya. Now that's where the problem actually comes. If you look at this particular ktavatu pratyaya as an example, the kakara present in the ktavatu pratyaya has immediate application as an itsamyaka letter when this particular krut prakriya is happening. So when the krut prakriya happens, there will be a step in that krut prakriya where you will need to inspect whether the pratyaya has an itsamyaka kakara or not, and then do a certain task. However, when it comes to this itsamyaka ukara, the krut pratyaya, the krut prakriya of gama plus ktavatu giving gatavata has absolutely no relevance with that ukara, itsamyaka ukara in ktavatu pratyaya. Whether ktavatu pratyaya has itsamyaka ukara or not, the prakriya will just go as it is. So the question over there is, what is the purpose of adding that itsamyaka ukara in the ktavatu pratyaya? And the answer given is that itsamyaka ukara, even though it is not required for the direct prakriya of gama plus ktavatu, this itsamyaka ukara still remains in the memory and it is considered associated with the resultant pratipadika called gatavata. So the resultant pratipadika, even though it does not have a visible ukara over there, even though the ukara was in the ktavatu pratyaya, even though the ukara was completely removed right in the krut prakriya step, still that ukara, because there was no prayojana of that ukara in the krut prakriya, that ukara remains unused. It's an extra entity whose use is still pending, and therefore it comes as a baggage along with that gata vata word. It is like your karma, where you did some karma in the last life and it didn't pay the fruits, so it's going to accompany you in this life. It's exactly like that. And therefore, the gata vata word will be called ukaraha itsamyakaha yasmin saha. So udit pratipadikam or ugit pratipadikam, because ukara or rukara, there is a combined term called ugit. So gatavata is called ugit pratipadikam. Buddhimat is called ugit pratipadikam because the ukara present in the matup pratyaya is not really useful in that tadhita prakriya called buddhi plus matup. It remains and accompanies buddhimat. Similarly, patha plus shatru, the rukara remains and accompanies pathat, and therefore pathat is a rudit pratipadika or also ugit pratipadika. In exactly the same way, vidvas is considered ugit pratipadika because that ukara present in the vasu pratyaya, even though it's samyaka, even though it goes at the beginning of the krut prakriya, is not used in the krut prakriya, it remains for getting used in the pratipadika. And where is this remaining itsamyaka ukara in say gatavata or buddhimata, pathata, vidvasa? Where is that going to get used? It will be used in the subanta prakriya. So in the subanta prakriya, there are sutras, there are steps where you have to look at the pratipadikam. You have to check whether there is a remnant, there is a carryover itsamyaka from one of the previous prakriyas. And if there is a carryover itsamyaka, you have to perform certain steps in a different way. This is exactly, if you go to the Vidvas word as a sample example, and if you go to this first form called Vidvan, you can look at this particular prakriya. I don't expect you to know anything, but just observe one sutram. There is a sutram over here, Ugidacham Sarvanamasthane Adhato Ho. It has the word Ugita present over here. This sutra gets applied if the pratipadika that you are starting is Ugita. Even though there is no visible itsamyaka ukara, it is a carryover and that counts. So that is the reason why that vidvas word has been considered as ugita. There are many such pratyayas and many such pratipadikas which will become ugita. Ugita is the only property that usually gets carried out. Others don't get carried out. And if that property gets used in the krut prakriya, it will not get going to be carried out. So kakara, for example, gets used in the krut prakriya. So it's not going to be carried out. Pakara of matupa is used in the krut prakriya. It is not going to get carried out. Only the unused properties get carried out. So let's read now. So vyutpanna pratipadikānām nirmānam dhatoho pratipadikātva pratyayasya yojanena sambhavati. So patha plus shatru becomes pathata, gama plus ktavatu becomes gatavata, similarly buddhimata, vidvasa, and so on. एतादृशानां प्रातिपदिकानां निर्माणार्थं प्रयुक्तेषु प्रत्ययेषु इत्युक्ते ktavatu, matub इत्यत्र विद्यमानाः केचन इत्सम्यकवर्णाः प्रातिपदिकस्य संदर्भेण सुबन्तादि प्रक्रियासु कार्यं कर्तुं स्थापिताः सन्ति। यथा पठ प्लस शत्रु इत्यत्र शत्रु प्रत्यये शकार ऋकारौ इति सम्यकौ। तत्र शकारः तु कृदन्त प्रक्रियायां विशिष्टं कार्यं कर्तुं स्थापितः अस्ति, परन्तु शत्रु प्रत्यये विद्यमानस्य ऋकारस्य कृदन्त प्रक्रियायां किमपि कार्यं नास्ति। अयं ऋकारः अग्रे पठत् शब्दस्य सुबन्तादि प्रक्रियासु जायमानस्य कार्यस्य कृते स्थापितः अस्ति। अतएव यद्यपि पठत् इति प्रातिपदिके कोऽपि इत्संज्ञक वर्णः साक्षात् न विद्यते, तथापि पठत् इति शब्दः शब्दपाठे रुदित नो चेत् उगित इति रूपेण एव स्वीक्रियते। सुबन्त प्रक्रियायाम् उगित विशिष्ट कार्यस्य विस्मरणं ममाभूत्। While doing the subanta prakriya, you have to look at the pathat word and remember that there is a remnant ukara, there is a carry over ukara which is its samyaka. So subanta prakriyayam ukit vishishtam karyasya vismaranam mabhut iti hetuna eva etadrisham kritamasti. Aneneva prakarena gatavad buddhimat vidvas ete sarvepi shabdaha ugit rupena eva svikaraniyaha. So even though there is no visible it marker, these are going to be considered as ugit or udit or rudit, whatever is the case. This is first point. And then second point is that there are a very handful of pratipadika. So if you go to the Ganapatha, in the Ganapatha, specifically, I think I gave this example of Nandyadi Gana, Nandigrahi Pachadibhyo Luninyachaha. In the Nandyadi Gana, there are not Nandyadi, the Pachadi Gana, Nandigrahi Pachadibhyo Luninyachaha, the Pachadi Gana of this Sutram. You can see that there are some Pratipadikas that have explicit takara added at the end. So Nadata, Bhashata, Plavata, Chorata, Devata, Doshata. So all these Pratipadikas, their Upadesha has been done with a takara. So very few pratipadicas, only a handful of pratipadicas, yesham upadeshaha krutaha asti. So in general, 99.999% of pratipadicas upadeshaha na kriyate. परंतु अत्र एतेषां प्रातिपदिकानां इत्संज्ञकवर्णेन सह उपदेशः क्रियते। अस्मिन् उपदेशे विद्यमानस्य अन्तिमव्यञ्जनस्य इत्संज्ञा भवति। अतः अत्र नदट, भषट, प्लवट, in all these cases there is an इत्संज्ञा of takara. So that is the second part. गणपाठे तु कानिचन प्रातिपदिकानि विशिष्ट इत्वर्णैः सह उपदिष्टानि सन्ति। देवट, चरट एंड सो ऑन। एतेषु प्रातिपदिकेषु तु ते वर्णाः अवश्यमेव इत्संज्ञकाः ज्ञेयाः, बिकॉज दैट्स द उपदेश। सो देवट, चरट एते टित् प्रातिपदिके स्तः। अस्य प्रयोजनं स्त्री प्रत्ययस्य योजन समये दृश्यते। सो व्हेन यू वांट टू मेक अ फेमिनाइन फॉर्म ऑफ द वर्ड देव, which is basically devat with a itsabnika takara gone away, there the question is this a tit word? So was there a takara itsamyaka over here? That kind of discussion, that kind of chintanam is needed, and that is where this takara will play a role. So etesham prayojanam stri pratyasi yojana samaye drishyate. So all this was actually not needed in that class, and if there was no question, I wouldn't have cared to explain it at this moment, but because there was a question, I spent the first 15 minutes on talking about this point. Now, if there are any questions specifically to this particular aspect, you can ask. Otherwise, we will move on to the revision of Asiddhatvam. Okay, so there are no questions. So let's now quickly do the revision of Asiddhatvam. Let us recollect once again. Vidhi sutreshu paraspara sambandhaha प्रायेण प्रक्रियायाः प्रत्येकस्मिन् सोपाने द्वयोः अथवा अधिकानां विधिसूत्राणां प्राप्तिः अस्ति। अन्ते एकस्यैव सूत्रस्य प्रयोगः सम्भवति। सो दैट इज कॉल्ड प्रसक्ति। अन्ते कस्य सूत्रस्य इयं प्रसक्तिः भवेत् तत् सम्यक् ज्ञातुं सूत्रेषु विद्यमानस्य परस्परसम्बन्धस्य तथा च बलाबलीयत्वस्य अवगमनम् आवश्यकं वर्तते। And then you can decide who is the badhaka, that is who is the blocker and who gets blocked. And then there are 5 different techniques. Utsargapavadatvam, which we have already studied, Antaranga Bahirangatvam, which is out of scope, Nityanityatvam, which is out of scope, Vipratishedha is what we are going to see today, and Asiddhatva is what we have seen in the previous class. So let's now quickly go to this concept of Asiddhatva, and then we will jump to the Vipratishedha. So Asiddhatva is simply ekena sutrena anyasya sutrasya adarshanam or asvikaraha. You change the mental model, you say that sutras can see each other and can decide when to go and act, and then one sutra just doesn't see another. So that is called asiddhatva. Ekena sutrena anyasya sutrasya tatha cha tasya karyasya. If you don't see sutra, you can't see what change it has made. So tasya sutrasya karyasya cha darshanam or asvikarah asiddhatvam namna jnayate. So yat na drishyate tad asiddham. So who is asiddha? The one whose effect is not seen, the one that is invisible is called asiddha. Now, when it comes to this asiddha, there is a impact on the balabali yaswam, the fight between the two sutras. If a siddha sutra and asiddha sutra appear for a fight, obviously the siddha sutra will win. So that is called utsarga lakshana bhavaha. Siddha sutra meva pravartate tatra sangharshaha nasti. And then whatever change the asiddha sutra has done, the siddha sutra cannot see it. So adesha lakshana pratishedhaha asiddha sutrena krutam karyam siddha sutrena na drishyate. There is a question on the group in the context of these two words. What is the samasa vigraha? What is the vyutpatti of these two words? Utsarga lakshana bhavaha and adesha lakshana pratishedaha. The question is valid. However, if I start explaining what utsarga lakshana bhavaha means and what adesha lakshana pratishedaha means, it will take probably one more class. So definitely not needed at the moment. And vigraha means you can do a simple samasa vigraha like utsargasya lakshanam tasya bhava utsarga lakshana bhava. आदेशस्य लक्षणम आदेश लक्षणम तस्य प्रतिषेध आदेश लक्षण प्रतिषेध. But that samasa vigraha won't mean anything. In order to understand these words, why they are created like this, one full 1 hour class might be needed, because there is a lot of background to be built up, which is not needed at the moment. So, and definitely not in this course as well. So I will not bother explaining the meanings of these words. Just remember, utsarga lakshana bhavaha means not acknowledgement of the conflict. So siddha sutra meva pravartate. Adesha lakshana pratishedha means not acknowledgement of the impact. So asiddha sutrena kritam karyam siddha sutrena na drishyate. Then we saw that there are 3 explicitly defined adhikaras in Ashtadhyayi. The first is the ekadesha asiddhatvam, the second is the abhiya asiddhatvam, and third is the tripadi asiddhatvam. The ekadesha asiddhatvam and abhiya asiddhatvam are completely out of scope. That is the reason why I did not discuss any examples of these two in the previous class. There was somebody who asked, I think on the group or personally to me, explaining one of these examples. I have said that it is not needed. It is going to add complexity or confusion at this moment. So all that you have to understand for now is there are 3 asiddhadhikaras and their names. That there is one ekadesha siddhatvam, which is the shatvatukora siddha. There is other asiddhatvam called abhiya siddhatvam, which is asiddhavatatrabhat. And then there is third asiddhatvam, tripadi asiddhatvam, which is given by the sutram purvatra siddham. This is the asiddhatvam that we are going to see. So the actual asiddhatvam that we studied in the previous class is this purvatra siddham, which divides the Ashtadhyayi into 2 parts, sapada saptadhyayi and tripadi. And the asiddhatva rule says sapada saptadhyayim prati tripadi asiddha tripadyam api purvam pratiparam shastram asiddham. So in simple language, it means that all the sutras of tripadi are asiddha towards all the sutras of sapada saptadhyayi, and inside tripadi, all the sutras after any given sutra are asiddha to that. So if X occurs before Y, then Y is asiddha towards X. So that's the 2 basic aspects of Purvatra Siddham. So 2 aspects combined with Utsarga Lakshana Bhava and Adesha Lakshana Pratichedha generate 4 niyamas, which we looked in details. So now I'm just going to read out the niyamas, recollect that you can remember or understand what we discussed yesterday. So yatra prakriyayam ekasmin eva sopane सपाद सप्ताध्याय्याः सूत्रस्य तथा च त्रिपादी सूत्रस्य युगपत् प्राप्तिः अस्ति तत्र सपाद सप्ताध्याय्याः सूत्रस्य दृष्ट्या कस्यापि संघर्षस्य अभावात् तस्मिन् सोपाने सपाद सप्ताध्यायी सूत्रम् एव प्रवर्तते. Example was dhurva plus au इत्यत्र उपधायाञ्च इत्यनेन उकारस्य दीर्घादेशः प्राप्तः आसीत् परन्तु तस्य असिद्धत्वात् राल्लोपः इत्यनेन वकारलोपे कृते धुरौ इति अन्तिमं रूपं सिद्ध्यति. The second part, प्रक्रियायां कस्मिन्नपि सोपाने त्रिपादिसूत्रेण यत्किमपि कार्यं क्रियते तत्कार्यं सपादसप्ताध्याय्याः सूत्रैः द्रष्टुं न शक्यते. So that's आदेश लक्षण प्रतिषेधः. The example was अर्जुन य उवाच इत्यत्र लोपशाकल्यस्य इत्यनेन यकारलोपे कृते अर्जुन उवाच इति स्थिते तस्य असिद्धत्वात् अग्रे आद्गुणः इति गुणैकादेशः न प्रवर्तते येन अर्जुन उवाच इत्येव अन्तिमं रूपं सिद्ध्यति. So that is the 2 aspects of Sapada Saptadhyayi versus Tripadi. So remember the tagging. Sapada Saptadhyayim prati Tripadi asiddha with Utsarga Lakshana Bhava and Sapada Saptadhyayim prati Tripadi asiddha with Adesha Lakshana Pratishedha. The same two things can be repeated for the next part, that is Tripadi versus Tripadi. So yatra prakriyayam ekasmin eva sopane dvayoho tripadi sutrayoho prasaktihi asti युगपत् प्राप्तिः अस्ति तत्र त्रिपाद्याः पूर्वसूत्रस्य दृष्ट्या कस्यापि सङ्घर्षस्य अभावात् तस्मिन् सोपाने तत् पूर्वसूत्रमेव प्रवर्तते. तो भिद प्लस त इत्यत्र खरिच इति परत्रिपादिसूत्रेण प्राप्तस्य चर्त्वस्य सिद्धत्वात् रदाभ्यां निष्ठात् ओना पूर्वस्य शतः इति पूर्वसूत्रेण दकारतकारयोः उभयोः नकारादेशे कृते भिन्न इति रूपं सिद्ध्यति. Same examples as the previous class, so I am just rushing through. प्रक्रियायां कस्मिन्नपि सोपाने केनापि त्रिपादिसूत्रेण यत्किमपि कार्यं क्रियते तत् कार्यं तस्मात् पूर्वं विद्यमानैः त्रिपादिसूत्रैः द्रष्टुं न शक्यते. So that is the आदेशलक्षणप्रतिषेधः. The example was प्रशाम इत्यत्र मोनो धातु इत्यनेन नकारादेशे कृते प्रशान इति स्थिते वस्तुतः नलोपः प्रातिपदिकान्तस्य इति नकारलोपः तत्र प्राप्नोति, परन्तु मोनो धातोः इत्यस्य असिद्धत्वात् अग्रे नलोपः प्रातिपदिकान्तस्य इत्यनेन नकारलोपः न प्रवर्तते, येन प्रशान इत्येव अन्तिमं रूपं सिद्ध्यति. So these are the four rules. Even if you do not understand anything, or even if you think yesterday's class was overloaded or confusing, these four rules you can just take them as the sutrartha of Purvatra Siddham. So what is the sutrartha of Purvatra Siddham? Technically it is Sapada Saptadhyayim prati tripadi asiddha tripadyam api purvam prati param shastram asiddham syat. That's exactly what is written in our sutra list, and you have to remember that. But what is the meaning of that? Remember these four golden rules of Tripadi Asiddhatva as the meaning of that particular sutrartha. Then we talked about some Sukshma Niyamas. So Tripadyam Vidyamanani Nishedha Sutrani, Apavada Sutrani, Vikalpa Sutrani, Tesha Mukhya Sutranam Kute Siddhani Santi. So Shat is a Nishedha for the Shtutvam. Shat appears after Shtutvam, but it is Siddha because it is a Nishedha Sutra. There was a question on the group which says that how do we know this? Do we know this from Vyakhyanas? The answer is always yes, that everything you know from Vyakhyanas, but you don't have to blindly believe Vyakhyanas. You can actually conclude this logically. This is a Nishedha. If the Nishedha is occurring after the main sutra, and if you are strictly following the Siddhatva, then what will happen? Anytime say sh plus na comes in the picture, Stohoshtunashtu says, okay, I will do the asiddhatva, I will do the shtutva. Shat says, no, there is a nishedha, I will not do the shtutva. And eventually Stohoshtunashtu says, I don't know who Shat is because it is a parasutra, so I will do shtutva. And eventually the shtutva will happen. If such a thing starts happening, Shat will render completely useless. Therefore, this particular provision is done. Not just that, remember the concept of ekavakyata. What is ekavakyata? The complete meaning of the sutra is only generated when you bring the nishedhas, when you bring the vikalpas, when you bring the samyas, when you bring the paribhashas inside that sutra. So in order for you to do the ekavakyata of stohoshtunashtuhu, you have to bring all these things without looking where they are in Ashtadhyayi. If there is a nishedha called shata, it has to be brought in stoshtunashtuhu so that the ekavakyata gets employed and the sutrartha becomes complete. And therefore, Nishedha Sutras, Vikalpa Sutras, Apavada Sutras are all by definition siddha towards their corresponding main sutra. That takes us to the next point. Again, Samya Sutras and Paribhasha Sutras do not respect the Asiddhatva boundary. So, Samya Sutrani, Paribhasha Sutrani cha Asiddhatvam Ativartante. They cross that boundary and go ahead. Again, the same reason. You want to do Ekavakyata, you need to bring in Samyas and Paribhashas to do Ekavakyata. Otherwise, the Sutra meaning will not be clear. So, for example, Jhalam Jash Jhashi, इत्यत्र झलाम इति षष्ठी अस्ति, झषि इति सप्तमी अस्ति. So you bring in षष्ठी स्थाने योगा तस्मिन् इति निर्दिष्टे पूर्वस्य and so on. And then one last bullet point that we studied was there is a very small set of pairs, 5 or 6 pairs, where the asiddhatva is overturned and some sutras of Tripadi are visible to some sutras of Sapada Saptadhyayi, and similarly some parasutras of Tripadi are visible to some Purva sutras of Tripadi. So kanichana vishishtani Tripadi sutrani keshanchana vishishthanam Sapada Saptadhyayi sutranam krute siddhani santi. Again, do we understand this from Vyakhyana? The answer is yes and no. Obviously, the Vyakhyanas will tell you, but you don't have to believe on Vyakhyanas. There is a logical reasoning why this is the final result. When you learn those sutras, we are still at the very early stage. We haven't learned Sasajushoru, we haven't learned Hashicha, we haven't learned Stunashtu, we haven't learned Dhodelopa. So it is very hard for you to understand. But once you learn all these sutras, automatically, logically, it will follow that if you do Sasajushoru, it will be visible to Hashicha. If you do Stunashtu, it will be visible to Dhodelopa. So these things logically follow once you understand the clear sutrartha for this. So you don't need any particular list of this Ashrayat Siddhatvam. There was a question on the group, is there a list in the Vyakhyanas? No, there is no list and you do not need the list. As soon as you see the sutrartha, as soon as you see their applicability in the prakriya, it will follow once we have reached that particular level of understanding. For now, all that you have to understand is that there are only handful, 5 or 6 cases where the rule of asiddhatva is overturned, and that is called ashrayat siddhatvam. So it is not told by Vyakhyanas or it is not forced by Vyakhyanas. It is something that follows logically. You will yourself find out as the course proceeds. So Kanichana Vishishta Tripadi Sutrani, Keshanchana Vishishtanam Sapada Saptadhyayi Sutranam Krute Siddhani Santi, एवमेव त्रिपाद्याः कानिचन विशिष्टानि परसूत्राणि पूर्वसूत्राणां कृते सिद्धानि सन्ति. This is called asiddhatvam and the examples are represented on the slide over here. This completes the running commentary of Punaravartanam of the asiddhatva, the topic of yesterday's class. I'm happy to take questions if there are any. Otherwise, we will start with today's discussion. Ratnakar Mahoday.
In fact, this is not a doubt, Acharya. Till now, rather, till yesterday and today's class, I didn't know that one has to look at a particular sutra or any particular sutra this way. All these days, I was under the impression that just like that, you look at, you take up Ashtadhyayi and read the sutras and understand the Vyakhyana or the Ardha of that particular sutra. But now only I could understand that one has to look at a sutra in this way. Really, I'm very thankful to you for the understanding that you have been giving us, Acharya. That's what I thought I would let you know. Thank you.
Thank you for the feedback. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Okay, so let's move on. So remember, there were 5 different type of interactions. One was Antaranga Bahiranga, which is out of scope. Other was Nitya, which is out of scope. Third was Asiddhatva, which just now we saw. The fourth was Utsargapavada, which let me just remind in one slide, and then we will go to the last one, the Vipratishedha. That's the topic of today's class. So remember, what is Utsargapavadatvam? Utsarga is the Samanya Vidhihi, Apavadaha is the Vishesha Vidhihi. And how is this Apavada defined? Niravakashatvam Apavadasya Bijam. Apavada does not have a free space to execute. Niravakashatvam, avakashasya abhavaha, avakashasya anupasthitihi. Whenever Apavada executes, Utsarga will say, this is also my area. In this way, so a simple example, I was discussing with somebody the other day, and they said, you take, for example, Bangalore versus Karnataka. Anything that is in Bangalore is in Karnataka, but anything that is in Karnataka is not in Bangalore. So it is exactly like this. Apavada is a small area outside the big area. So we also saw it using that particular Venn diagram. Utsargasya karyakshetram bruhat asti, tasmat tasya antaha apavadasya karyakshetram vidyate. So yatra yatra apavadasya praptihi asti, tatra tatra utsargasya api praptihi asti. So in our particular analogy, Bangalore will be apavada and Karnataka will be utsarga. So yatra yatra apavadasya prapti asti, tatra tatra utsargasya prapti asti, parantu yatra yatra utsargasya prapti asti, tatra tatra apavadasya prapti na vartate. And then the badhya badhaka bhava is given by this paribhasha, yena na prapte yo vidhirarabhyate satasya badhako bhavati. Basically, it says that the internal circle will take precedence, because if every time you choose to pick up the outer circle, then internal circle will never get a chance to execute. So yena na prapte ityukte yena avashyam prapte yo vidhihi arabhyate saha tasya ityukte saha apavadaha tasya utsargasya badhakaha bhavati. Therefore, an example, the swamor napumsakat is the utsarga. This is the example picked up from that slide itself. In the Napumsakalinga words, the su and ama pratyaya undergo a lukka. So for example, vari plus su becomes vari. So that's the swamor napumsakat, which causes the lukka, removal of the su pratyaya. Atom is the immediate next sutra, which says that for akaranta napumsakalinga shabda, su gets converted to ama. So the previous sutram just completely deletes su for all napumsakalingas. The next one is specific to akaranta napumsakalingas and it converts su to ama. So swamor napumsakat is the outer circle which is applicable for akaranta, ikaranta, ukaranta, rukaranta napumsakalingas. Whereas atom is only applicable for akaranta napumsakalingas. So that's the inner circle, and therefore the phala plus su condition utsarga apavadayoho yugapat prapto apavadaha eva pravartate. So atom will eventually convert su pratyay to ama, giving phalam as the final form. In this way, the relationship between the two sutras in the case of Utsarga Apavada is one circle inside another circle, and that is what we mean by Niravakashatvam Apavadasya Bijam. Now, with this background, let us move ahead. Vipratishedha is yet another relationship between the two sutras, which can be represented in the Venn diagram in form of intersecting circles. So in the previous case, it was overlapping circles, one inside another. Now it is intersecting circles. What does it mean? It means that if there is a sutram A, then there are going to be situations where sutram A is applicable and sutram B is absolutely not applicable. Maybe the sthani doesn't match, nimitta doesn't match, whatever. So sutram A is applicable in many cases. Similarly, sutram B is also applicable in many cases. And there is a small set of cases where both the sutras are applicable. So this is tulya bala virodha. The Vyakhyanas use this word tulya bala virodha. What is tulya bala virodha? Balam tulyam asti. Now tulyam means you are not taking a scale and measuring it. You are basically saying that each can execute independent of another. So for example, one worker works from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Other worker works on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the entire week is covered. But this is tulya balatva. The first worker works for 3 days where there is no intervention from the second worker. Similarly, the second worker works for 3 days where there is no interference from the first worker. Only on that middle Thursday, which is the last day of the first worker and the first day of the second worker, there might be some interaction, some conflict, some interference and so on. So this is called tulya bala virodha, and this is also represented in Vyakhyanas by the word called Vipratishedha. So yatra dvau prasangau anyarthau. Prasangau means sutras or karyas. Anyartho means independent of each other. Anyaha arthaha vartate. Yatra dvau prasangau anyarthau. So two cases or two sutras which have their independent existence, independent execution. Ekasmin yugapat prapnutaha. Under some circumstances they overlap. Saha tulya bala virodha. That tulya bala virodha is known in Vyakarana Shastra by the technical term called विप्रतिषेध. सो यत्र द्वे सूत्रे सामान्य रूपेण भिन्नेषु स्थलेषु स्वतंत्र रूपेण कार्यं कुरुतः ते कुत्रचित् युगपत् प्राप्तुतः चेत् तयोर्मध्ये यः संघर्षः भवति सः विप्रतिषेधः इति नाम्ना ज्ञायते. So this is the diagram. Prathama sutrasya karyaksthalani, dvitiya sutrasya karyaksthalani, pretty different, and then in some cases dvayoho sutrayoho yugapat praptihi vartate. And now the sutram vipratishedhe param karyam. This sutram says etadrishe vipratishedhe jate ashtadhyayi krabena anantaram sthitasya sutrasya prayogaha bhavati. So when there is a conflict, look at the numbers of the sutras. Remember, sutra numbers are extremely important. Ordering of the sutra matters a lot. So look at the numbers of the sutras, and whichever sutra has a higher number, it can be the same pada, same adhyaya, but a sutra that occur later, or it can be a pada that is afterwards or adhyaya that is afterwards, whichever it is, which comes later in the Ashtadhyayi krama. That is the sutra that wins that particular battle, that wins that particular fight. That is the gist of vipratishedhe param karyam. So here is an example. इको यणचि तथा च सार्वधातुकार्धधातुकयोः इति द्वयोः सूत्रयोः पृथक् पृथक् प्रयोगस्य अवकाशः वर्तते. Let me explain this. But before that, understand this point. Anytime you are supposed to find vipratishedha, the first thing you have to do is pruthak pruthak prayogasya avakashaha. Unless you can show, going back to the previous screen, unless you can show that there is a part of A which is not overlapping with B, and there is a part of B which is not overlapping with A, unless you show this, you cannot proceed. So the very first step in the Vipratishedha is to show Anyartha condition. Dvau prasangu Anyarthau. And then you say that now that I have established an independent execution of both of them, here is a tricky place where both of them come together. So that is Ekasmin Yugapat Prapnutaha. So let's look at this again. Let's look at the example. So you have the sutram iko yanachi, you have the sutram sarvadhatukardhadhatukayoho. Let us look at their different areas of operation. Iko yanachi says ik varnasya achvarne pare yanadesha bhavati, iti plus api is ipyapi. This is a simple application of iko yanachi. सार्वधातुकार्धधातुकयोः says yaha pratyayah kit utangit nasti. So you take a pratyaya which is not a kit pratyaya and not a ngit pratyaya. Say for example tavyata pratyaya. It is neither kit nor ngit or aniyar, something like that. So yaha pratyayah kit utangit nasti. तस्मिन् प्रत्यये परे धातोः अन्तिम इक्वर्णस्य गुणः भवति. So ni plus tavya. Here ni becomes ne, gunaha bhavati, and ne tavya iti rupam siddhyati. Now before we go ahead, understand that this is actually an independent area of execution. So the example for ikoyanachi, iti plus api, there is no pratyaya called api. So sarvadhatuka ardhadhatukayo is all about the pratyaya pare. If there is no pratyaya, it means sarvadhatuka ardhadhatukayo does not have the necessary nimitta, which means that sutra will not kick in. So for example of iti plus api, sarvadhatuka ardhadhatukayo cannot be applied. So this is independent execution of eco energy. Similarly, when you go to sarvadhatuka ardhadhatukayoho, the example is ni plus tavya is equal to netavya. Tavya is not even ajadi. For eco energy, the second word must be ajadi. It must have an ach letter. Now, because tavya is not ajadi, therefore ni plus tavya has no scope for eco energy. This way, we have established the independent execution of Ikoyanachi and Sarvadhatuka Ardhadhatukayoho, and now we come up with a problematic situation. Ni plus aniyar. Aniyar is an ajadi pratyaya. Now, because it is a pratyaya which is neither kit or nit, Sarvadhatuka Ardhadhatukayoho will be applicable. It will say, do the guna. But aniyar is also an ajadi word. So ikvarnasya achvarne pare yanadesha bhavati. So ikoyanachi will say do the yanadesha. So now there is a conflict. So ni plus anyar ityatra dvayoho sutrayoho yugapat praptihi vartate asyam sthitau vipratishedhe param karyam iti nyayena iti sutrena iti niyamena iti paribhashaya परसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति. So look at the number. Eco energy is in 6.1. Sarvadhatuka ardhadhatuka is 7.3. Therefore, ni plus aniyar. Do not do yanadesha. Do gunadesha. Ne plus aniyar. Ayadi sandhi agre bhavati. Nayaniya. This is how nayaniya word is formed. Yet another example. Supicha तथा बहुवचने झल्येत एतयोः सूत्रयोः पृथक् पृथक् प्रयोगस्य अवकाशः वर्तते. Now look at the sutra, they are just next to each other, 73102 and 73103, cutting competition. So let's see what each of these sutra means. The Supicha sutra, now both of these are new to you, so pay little attention. Again, I am not teaching the sutras. We will learn the sutras officially later on in the Subanta Prakaranam. For now, just pay attention for the one line sutrartha. So yayadi sup pratyeye pare. if there is a sup pratyaya that begins either with the bhakara or with basically bhakara. So yanyadi sup pratyaya pare and sakara, I think, no, not sakara, just yakara, bhakara. So yanyadi is yay pratyahara. So ha ya va ta lana nyama gananam jhabhai. So out of all this, specifically only bhakara really matters. So ययादि सुप्रत्यय परे इत्युक्ते भकारादि सुप्रत्यय परे अदन्तस्य अंगस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति. So if you have an adanta anga called Rama, and if there is a bhakaradi or a yayadi sup pratyaya, Rama plus bhyam akaradeshah bhavati Ramabhyam iti rupam siddhyati. So Supicha Sutra says akaradeshah bhavati. Kada यदा अदन्तम अंगम इत्युक्ते ह्रस्व अकारान्तम अंगम अस्ति तथा च ययादि सुप्रत्यय यय प्रत्याहारस्य वर्णः यस्य प्रारंभे वर्तते. यय प्रत्याहार has lot many letters, but what matters over here is bhakaradi pratyaya in this particular sutra. So bhakaradi pratyय परे अंगस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति इति सामान्य रूपेण वक्तुं शक्यते. So bhakaradi pratyय परे अंगस्य दीर्घादेशः भवति. Then there is an immediate next sutra called bahuvachane jhalyet. This sutra says bahuvachanasya jhaladi supratyay asti. Jhal is jhabay ghadadash and so on up to shashasara hal. For all practical purposes, it is basically bha and sa. So bahuvachanasya bhakaradihi nochat sakaradihi pratyayah asti chet adantasya angasya ekaradeshah bhavati. So Rama plus su एकारादेशे कृते रामेषु इति रूपं सिद्ध्यति. सो बहुवचने इत्युक्ते बहुवचनस्य झलादि इत्युक्ते भकारादि नो च सकारादि प्रत्यय अस्ति चेत् एकारादेशः भवति. Now observe that there is an independent execution. Supicha is only for the bhakaradi pratyaya and the example is Rama plus bhyam. It is a dvivachana pratyaya, so bahuvachane jhalyeta is out of scope. For the example of bahuvachane jhalyeta, Rama plus su, it is the sakaradi pratyaya, so supicha is out of scope because supicha only works with bhakaradi pratyayas. So essentially, we have independent scope of execution for supicha and bahuvachane jhalyeta, and then the overlap happens in an example called Rama plus bhyasa. Somebody is asking what happens with bhisa. We'll keep that aside. There is yet another sutram that comes in for bhisa. The prakriya is a little bit different, so we will take that, keep that aside. But similar to bhisa, you can talk about bhyasa, which is basically chaturthi panchami bahuvachan. Same problem, but a simpler pratyaya is being taken by me. So Rama plus bhyasa ityatra kim bhavati? Bhakaradi pratyaya asti. So supicha is possible, but it is also a bahuvachanasya jhaladi pratyaya. Remember, jhaladi pratyaya means bha or sa. So it is the bahuvachanasya jhaladi pratyaya. Therefore, bahuvachane jhalyeta is also applicable. Atra dvayoho sutrayoho yugapat praptihi vartate. अस्यां स्थितौ विप्रतिषेधे परं कार्यमित्यनेन परसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति. So you get रामेभ्यः. If it was, if Supicha would have applied, you would end up with a form called Ramabhyah, which is incorrect. But now there is a, so vipratishedhe param karyam, the bahuvachane jhalyeta kicks in and you get Ramebhyah. This is the crux of vipratishedhe param karyam. Any questions? So yesterday's class was probably complex. Today's is very simple. This is all that is there for vipratishedhe param karyam. Okay. Now some interesting examples. Anyani kanichana udaharanani. It turns out that Vipratishedha is not only for the Vidhi Sutras. You can do Vipratishedha on Niyama Sutras, on the Paribhashas, on the Samnya Sutras, and so on. So Vipratishedhe Param Karyam iti Sutram kevalam Vidhi Sutranam sandarbhena eva pravartate iti na avashakam. Anya prakarasya sutreshu api Vidhi Vipratishedha sambhavati. So here is a simple example. The paribhashas that are now familiar to us. Tasmin iti nirdishte purvasya and tasmad ityuttarasya. Tasmin iti nirdishte purvasya says that the tasmin iti nirdishte purvasya says that the saptami is used as the paranimitta. So that's the saptami. And tasmad ityuttarasya says that the panchami is used as the purva nimitta. So that's the panchami. And when there is no shashti, and when there is a conflict on who should become who should take the role of shashti, what will happen? We studied Ubhaya Nirdeshe Panchami Nirdesho Baliyan. We said that the Purva Nimitta, that is the Panchami, retains its meaning, whereas the Saptami will change back, will start representing the Sthani. Why is Ubhaya Nirdeshe Panchami Nirdesho Baliyan? How did this paribhasha come up? This paribhasha came because of this paribhasha came because of Vipratishede Param Karyam. The sutram for the Paranimitta is the Purva Sutra. The sutram for the Purva Nimitta is after that. So 1167 is the Purva Nimitta, Tasmadityuttarasya. 1166 is the Paranimitta. And therefore, when there is a fight between the Purva Nimitta Sutra and the Paranimitta Sutra, Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. So the one Tasmadityuttarasya, which is the Purva Nimitta Sutra, will remain or will retain its Karya and will defeat the other one. Tasminiti Nirdishte Purvasya, once defeated, will start representing the Sthani. So the paribhasha Ubhaya Nirdeshe Panchami Nirdesho Baliyan is not created out of magic or is not created out of thin air. It is the direct application of Vipratishede Param Karyam. The next one, here is another example of Vipratisheda between the other set of paribhashas. Again, very familiar paribhashas. Adehe parasya and anekalshit sarvasya. If you remember that particular slide, I mentioned purva and par on the endings of that arrow. So etayoho madhye vipratishe jate paratvad anekalshit sarvasya iti sarvadeshah bhavati. So again, another example, I will not spend time on this because we have spent enough time comparing Adev Parasya and Anekalshit Sarvasya. It is the Anekalshit Sarvasya that will specifically take the precedence. Ato Bhisa Aisa is the example I think we took in that particular case. And Adev Parasya, because it is the Purva Sutra, it will not be able to show its impact. So that is yet another example where Anya Prakarasya Sutreshu api Vipratishedha Sambhavati. Let me give you yet another example. Dvandva samasaha yada vartate. If you take Ramaha cha Lakshmanaha cha, it is Rama Lakshmanao. If you take Lakshmanaha cha Ramaha cha, it is also Rama Lakshmanao. So when a Dvandva samasa is created, you cannot randomly decide who is the first and who is the second. There are rules in Ashtadhyayi which will tell you who is the first and who is the second. There are specific set of 5 or 6 rules. Even if you say Ramaha cha Lakshmanaha cha, or even if you say Lakshmanaha cha Ramaha cha, in the Vigravakya you are free to say whatever you want. But in the Samasta Pada, there is a rule which will decide who comes first and who comes second. So whatever is your Vigravakya, it will eventually be Rama Lakshmana. Similarly, Harihi cha, Haraha cha, Hari Haro. Hari will always come first and then Hara will come. You can't say Hara Hari. You have to say Hari Haro, even though the Vigraha is Harishcha Harashcha or Harashcha Harishcha. There are rules that dictate that. So Dvandva Samase Kim Padam Prathamasthanam Grihnati इत्यस्य विषये अपि विप्रतिषेधस्य उदाहरणरूपे विदारणं लभ्यते. So there is one sutram called Ajadyadantam. Ajadyadantam sutra says yaha shabdaha ajadihi ajantaha asti. It should start with a swara and it should end with a swara. So ajadihi ajantaha cha asti saha samastapade prathamam sthanam grihnati. So if there is a word which begins with a swara and ends with a swara, it must come as the first member of the Dvandva Samasa. So kharaha cha ushtraha cha. Ushtra is a word which starts with ukara and ends with akara. See, understand, ushtraha is the subanta. That is not what we are looking at. The pratipadikam is what we have to look at. So ushtra is the pratipadika. Ukara is the ukara indicates it is ajadi. Shtra, so akara indicates it is ajanta. On the other hand, for khara, it is ajanta, but it is not ajadi. So it is not ajadi plus ajanta, whereas ushtra is ajadi plus ajanta. So atra kharaha cha ushtraha cha ityatra ushtra iti prarambhe agacchati adi prathama sthanam grihnati. So ushtra kharam iti tatra samastapadam siddhyati. Then there is another rule which says alpachtaram. The word which has lesser number of swaras will come first. Alpa-ach, alpa-ach-taram. So yasmin shabde न्यून संख्यकाः अच्वर्णाः सन्ति सः शब्दः समस्तपदे प्रथमं स्थानं गृह्णाति. So Lakshmanaha cha Ramaha cha. Rama has lesser number of letters. So, sorry, ach letters, lesser number of swaras. So, Rama will come as the first member. Therefore, Lakshmanaha cha Ramaha cha will be Rama Lakshmano. Now, before you go ahead, observe the independent execution. I am stressing this again and again. Unless you prove the independent execution, Vipratishedha makes no sense. So let's see if there is independent execution. Alpachtaram cannot be applied for Kharaha cha plus Kharaha plus Ushtraha because both of them have same number of swaras. Ajadyadantam cannot be used for Lakshmanaha cha Ramaha cha because neither of them is Ajadi. So this is independent area of execution. And let's now look at an overlap. Vakcha Indraha ityatra Alpachtaratvam asti. Vak has only one swara, akara. There is no swara after kakara. So it is ekach. So Vak is actually less ach letters. But Indra is Ajadi. So if you want to apply Ajadyadantam, Indra will come first. If you want to apply Alpachtaram, Vak will come first. Who will win? So atra vipratishedhena the parasutra Alpachtaram iti sutrasyeva prayogaha kriyate. Atra vach shabdaha samastapade pratham sthanam gृह्णाति vakcha indraha cha iti vagindrau. Anena prakarena atra samasta padam siddhyati. So these are actually niyama sutras. These are the sutras that will tell you how the prakriya goes. So how the which word comes first and which word comes second. So niyama sutreshu atra vipratishedha asmabhi drashtum shakyate. Paribhashasu vipratishedha asmabhi drashtum shakyate. Samnya sutreshu api vipratishedha asmabhi drashtum shakyate. So sampradana, apadana, karana, karta, karma, these are all which you are familiarly known as karakas. These are actually samnyas. एतेषु संज्ञासूत्रेषु अपि तत्र विप्रतिषेधः दृश्यते. So there are many cases where you see vipratished running across entire Ashtadhyayi. Now there is one question about Sapada Saptadhyayi versus Tripadi. I'll take that in a minute. I think it's there in one of the slides. But before that, there are, I think, just 2 slides and we are done. So before that, there is one small there is a question another. In case of Hariharav, what happens? So Hariharav, there is a yet another sutram. So Hariharav has not, I mean, for Hariharav, Ajadyadantam is not in picture, Alpachtaram is not in picture. So Hariharav cannot be resolved by this. There is yet another sutram called Dvandveghi, which is 2 to 22. Dvandveghi is a sutram that will say that Hari comes first and Hara comes later. So you don't have to worry about Hariharav. I'm not teaching Dvandva Samasa over here. I'm not teaching who comes first and who comes second. I'm just using these examples to show Vipratishedha. Hariharav example will be taken later on in the course when we study the Dvandva Samasa. Okay. Now, the only fine print or small bullet, we always say like there is asterisk conditions apply. So read this. Dvayoho sutrayoho madhye vipratishethe jate. In some rare cases, Purva Sutrasya Prayogena Eva Ishta Rupam Siddhyati. So when I say rare, less than 10 cases. In 99.99% cases, it is the Parasutram. But in some rare cases, Purva Sutrasya Prayogena Eva Ishta Rupam Siddhyati. So here is a simple example. There are these 2 sutras, Ghernyiti and Ikochi Vibhaktau. Let us understand the meaning. The Ghernyiti Sutra says that if you have Ikaranta Pullinga or a Napumsakalinga Shabda. So Ikaranta Pullinga like Muni, Ikaranta Napumsakalinga like Vari. So if you have Ikaranta Pullinga Napumsakalinga Shabda and there is a Nit Pratyaya, Supratyaya. So Nye is a Nit Pratyaya or Ngasi, Ngas. You can take any of them. So if there is a Nit Pratyaya, Angasya Gunaha Bhavati. So Muni plus Nye, Nye is essentially A. So Muni plus A, Angasya Gunaha Bhavati. So Mune plus A, Ayad Sandhim Krutva, Munaye iti Rupam Siddhyati. So this is Ghernyiti Sutram. Then there is a sutram called Ikochi Vibhaktau. This Ikochi Vibhaktau says Ikaranta Napumsakalinga Shabdasya. So only words like Vari. Ikaranta Napumsakalinga Shabdasya Ajadi Vibhakti Pratyaya Pare Num iti Agamaha Bhavati. So here is an Ikaranta Napumsakalinga Shabda like Vari. And there is an Ajadi Pratyaya, Ajadi Vibhakti Pratyaya like Os. The numagama will happen midachontyat paraha. So antyat achvarnat paraha numagamaha उकारस्य उच्चारणार्थ स्थापना अस्ति तस्य लोपः भवति, मकारस्य इत्संज्ञा लोपः, वारिन प्लस ओस वारिणोः. So the panchami shashti saptami dvivachan of the vari word is varinoho. By the way, let me take a pause and I want you to realize that you are now able to create or understand many prakriyas with very trivial efforts. Like for example, Munaye, which is the Chaturthi Ekvachan of Muni, you could just very easily see the prakriya because you exactly knew what its samya collectors are, what guna is, what ayadi is, sandhi is, and so on. So this way, till today, the third prakaranam ends today, the samya paribhasham. This basically most of the complex stuff is done in this course. Going ahead, it's all application of the paribhashas and samyas and vipratisheda and asiddhatva that we have learned till now is the repeated application of those concepts again and again to derive the final form. So the easier part of the course is actually going to starting from the next module. You can see that when we enter Subanta Prakaranam, you will be able to very easily derive all these words like Mundaye or Varinoho with very little help from me. All that I have to tell you is there is a numagama. As soon as I tell you there is a numagama, you will understand midachontyat paraha. So numagama will come at the end. Makaraha itsamyakaha halantyam tasya lopaha ukara ucharanartha gacchati varina plus o. Then there is a natva. We will learn the sutra varinoho. There is nothing over there. So prakriya will become very easy if the material taught till today's class is perfectly understood. Anyway, coming back to the topic, let's see where these two have independent scope of execution. In the vari plus osa, there is no ngit pratyaya. Os is not a ngit pratyaya, so gher ngiti is not applicable. In muni plus nye, it is not ikaranta napumsakalinga shabda. Muni is pullinga, so ikochi vibhaktau is not applicable. Therefore, each of these, gher ngiti and ikochi vibhaktau, they have different scopes of execution over here, and the overlap comes by when we consider the chaturthi ekvachana of the vari word. So vari iti shabdasya chaturthi ekvachanam asti. Vari shabdasya chaturthi ekvachane kim bhavati? Ikaranta napumsakalinga shabdasya nit pratyayah asti. So chaturthi ekvachanan nye pratyay is a nit pratyaya. And ikochi vibhakto ikaranta napumsakalinga shabdasya ajadi vibhakti pratyay asti. So ngit is ajadi because nakara is it samyaka, you don't consider it for considering adi and anta, so it is ajadi. So vari shabdasya chaturthi ekvachane घेरिंगिति तथा इकोचि विभक्तौ एतयोः मध्ये विप्रतिषेधः अस्ति. And now apply vipratishehe param karyam. 7173 is the purva sutram, 73111 is the parasutram. If you apply the parasutram over here by vipratishehe param karyam, if you apply parasutram similar to munnaye, the form that you will get is varye, which is an incorrect form. The correct form is varine. The incorrect form is varye. So अत्र परसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः क्रियते चेत् वार्ये इति अनिष्टं रूपं सिद्ध्यति. अत्र विप्रतिषेधे जाते अपि इष्टरूपस्य सिद्ध्यर्थं पूर्वसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः एव करणीयः, येन वारिणे इति रूपं सिद्ध्यति. If you apply the Purva Sutra, which is 7173, vari plus nye will be vari plus num plus a, varine. In this way, we use Purva Vipratishedha. This is similar to that Ashrayat Siddhatvam, where Ashrayat Siddhatvam forces an overwriting on the Tripadya Siddhatva rule. Similarly, the Purva Vipratishedha is an overruling over the normal Vipratishedha rule. The good news is that Purva Vipratishedha is thoroughly captured by Vartikakara using two Vartikas. So there are just two Vartikas where the Vartikakara precisely enumerates the Purva Vipratishedha. Everywhere else it is Para Vipratishedha. That is the normal Vipratishedha. So Vartikakara says Guda Vruddhi Autvat Rujvat Bhavebhyo Num Purva Vipratishedhena and Numacherat Rujvat Bhavebhyo Nut Purva Vipratishedhena. Let me repeat this. Vartikakara says Guda Vruddhi Autvat Rujvat Bhavebhyo Num Purva Vipratishedhena and Numacherat Rujvat Bhavebhyo Nut Purva Vipratishedhena. Typing mistake on the last line. It should be Purva Vipratishedhena. Purva Vipratishedhena. So these are the two Vartikas where the Vartikakara captures the locations of the Purva Vipratishedha. I'm not teaching these Vartikas right now, but these are very basic Vartikas. They are taught in the Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi course. We will learn these Vartikas in module number 5 when we talk about the Subanta Prakriya. So these two Vartikas and the concept of Purva Vipratishedha, we will look again in more details in module number 5. For now, all that I wanted to tell you is that there is a concept called Purva Vipratishedha, where the Purva Sutra wins in case of Vipratishedha, and these two are captured by Vartikakara by two Vartikas. With that, let's go to the last slide, which connects the discussion from the previous class to today's class, Vipratishedha and Asiddhatvam. And there was a similar question over here. What happens in case of Sapada Saptadhyayi versus Tripadi? So let's read. It's mostly self-explanatory. So instead of explaining early, I'll just explaining in advance. I'll just directly read what is written on the slide. So द्वयोः सूत्रयोः मध्ये विप्रतिषेधः तदा एव शक्यः यदा द्वे अपि सूत्रे परस्परयोः उपस्थितिं स्वीकुरुतः. The overlap is possible only when I can acknowledge that you are there, and similarly you can acknowledge that I am there. If one sutram just doesn't acknowledge another, the concept of Vipratishedha is just not possible. So यदि ताभ्याम एकम सूत्रम अन्यस्य कृते असिद्धम अस्ति तर्हि तत्र विप्रतिषेधः अपि न शक्यः अपितु सिद्धम सूत्रमेव प्रयोक्तव्यम्. And therefore, when it comes to asiddhatva, vipratisheddha concept is not applicable. Whosoever is siddha, you just use it. So here is a very popular example that is taught in the early pages of Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. We will learn it as the course proceeds. I'm not teaching the example right now. I'm just showing you how that particular asiddhatva interacts with vipratisheddha. So there is this sutram hashicha in 6.1. This sutra says padanta ru ityasya hash varne pare ukaradesha bhavati. So hash is the mrudu vyanjana. So ramar plus gacchati. This is actually ru. Ukara has been removed. So padanta ru varnasya hash varne pare, that is gakare pare ukaradesha bhavati. So rama ra will get converted to u. So Rama u gacchati, and then guna will happen eventually, and Ramo gacchati is the final form. So Ramar gacchati, what we are interested in is Rama u gacchati. Ra is getting converted to u. This is Hashicha. The next sutram is Rori, which is a sutram in the Tripadi. Simple sutram, Rephe pare rephasya lopaha bhavati. If you have two rakaras, one on the end of the previous word and the second at the beginning of the next word, the one that is on the end of the previous word is removed. So Devar plus Rakshanti. The R of Devar is removed. Deva Rakshanti. So that is Rori. Now, before we go ahead, let us understand that there is at least a scope for Vipratishedha. There is a scope for Anyatra Praptihi. So, Hashicha, the example given is Ramar Gacchati. There is no R plus R next to each other. Therefore, it is not possible to apply Rori. For Rori, the example given is Devar Rakshanti. No, I made a small mistake. Let me just recollect and fix it right away. So let's go to this Hashicha Sutram. It says, look at this part which I completely missed. Rasva akarat parasya ru ityasya. This is the part of Hashicha. Hashicha requires Rasva akarat parasya ru ityasya. So if you go to the slide deck now, in Hashicha, it is Rasva akarat parasya refasya. Whereas in case of Devar, there is no Rasva akara. So Hashicha should say Hashicha iti sutrena Rasva akarat parasya ru ityasya hashvarne pare ukaradesha bhavati. Look at the sutram again. The sutra says Rasva akarat parasya ru ityasya. So in case of the Ramar gacchati, Rasva akarat ru iti paraha asti, and therefore Hashicha is applicable. In case of Devar Rakshanti, there is Ru, but it is not after Rasva Akara. So Rori is applicable, Hashicha is not applicable. And now the conflict is seen in case of Manara plus Ratha. Manara plus Ratha ityasyam stitau dve sutre yugapat prapnutaha. Hashicha, because Rasva Akaradanantaram Ra iti asti. So Hashicha ityanena Manara ityasya rephasya ukaradesha sambhavati. But there is a R and a R. So Rori ityanena manar ityasya rephasya lopaha sambhavati. So now you have both the sutras. Technically, this is Vipratishedha, but look at the sutra numbers. 8314 is Tripadi, 61114 is Sapada Saptadhyayi. Sapada Saptadhyayi Sutram does not accept the presence of Tripadi Sutram. Hashicha says that I don't know who is Rory, and therefore Manara iti avasthayam Rory iti sutram Hashicha iti sutrasya krute asiddham asti. अतः मनर इत्यत्र विप्रतिषेधस्य चिन्तनं नैव करणीयम् अपितु सिद्धसूत्रस्य इत्युक्ते सपादिसूत्रस्य एव प्रयोगः करणीयः. कः अर्थः? हशिच इत्यनेन रेफस्य उकारादेशे कृते मन उ प्लस रथ and then you do the guna sandhi manorath. So if by mistake you end up applying Rory, an incorrect form called Manaratha will be generated. Thankfully, Hashicha does not see Rory. If Hashicha would have seen Rory, then the Vipratishede Paramkaryam would have forced Rory. Thankfully, Hashicha does not see Rory, and therefore only Hashicha can be applied, and you get Manurath getting converted to Manoratha. This way, the bottom line over here is that Vipratishedha and Asiddhatva do not interact together. If there is Asiddhatva, Vipratishedha is not in the picture. Any questions? No questions. So that's it. Let's take a quick look at the Sutrartha. Vipratishedhe param karyam tulya bala virodhe param karyam syat. विप्रतिषेधे इत्युक्ते विप्रतिषेधः यदा अस्ति तदा विप्रतिषेधे जाते सति सप्तमी अस्ति. विप्रतिषेधः इत्युक्ते तुल्यबलविरोधः द्वौ प्रसङ्गौ अन्यार्थौ एकस्मिन् युगपत् प्राप्नुतः सः विप्रतिषेधः. एतादृशे विप्रतिषेधे जाते परम कार्यम इत्युक्ते अनन्तरं विद्यमानं सूत्रं प्रवर्तते. सो व्हाट इज द सूत्रार्थ? द्वयोः तुल्यबलयोः सूत्रयोः एकस्मिन् एव सोपाने युगपत् प्राप्तिः भवति चेत् ताभ्याम् अष्टाध्यायी क्रमेण अनन्तरं विद्यमानं सूत्रं प्रसज्यते. द एग्जाम्पल ऑफ सुपिच्छ एंड बहुवचने झल्येत एतयोः मध्ये विप्रतिषेधः अस्ति. आई हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड दिस. देयरफॉर राम प्लस भ्यस इत्यत्र परत्वात् बहुवचने झल्येत इति सूत्रेण एकारादेशे कृते रामेभ्यः इति रूपं सिद्ध्यति. One last bullet. I think this is not actually something that you should get confused, but many people get confused. So I want to explain this particular aspect. द्वयोः सूत्रयोः विप्रतिषेधे जाते परसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति. कुत्र भवति? तस्मिन् सोपाने भवति. अस्य अर्थः पूर्वसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः कदापि नैव भवति इति नास्ति. This does not eliminate the Purva Sutra from the Prakriya. It is only saying that on that particular step of the Prakriya, there was a conflict and the Purva Sutra has lost the battle for that particular step. केवलं प्रक्रियायाः तस्मिन् सोपाने परसूत्रस्य प्रयोगः भवति इति अत्र आशयः अस्ति. परसूत्रस्य प्रयोगात् अनन्तरं मे बी ऑन द इमीडिएट नेक्स्ट लाइन और मे बी 5 लाइन्स लेटर पुनः कुत्रचित् पूर्वसूत्रस्य प्रयोगस्य अवकाशः सम्भवति चेत् तत्र भिन्नं विप्रतिषेधचिन्तनं भवेत्. So there also you do separate vipratishetha, asiddhatva, purva, paratva, whatever. I mean, antaranga, bahiranga, whatever nitya nitya is there, utsarga, apavada, you discuss that separately. So this is not outrightly eliminating the Purva Sutram. It is only saying that on that particular line of Prakriya, the Purva Sutram does not execute. That's all for today. We have finished the Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. That was the 60th sutra of today of our course. In this way, we have completed the 3 modules: Vyakarana Shastra Praveshaha, Paniniya Praveshaha, and Samya Paribhasham. I will wait for a minute if there are any questions. There is a question over here that there was some PhD thesis a few years ago about Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. Can you throw some light on it? Completely out of scope. If you're interested, there are documents that I've written and there is a video on my channel, Ashtadhyayi's channel. You can take a look at it, but it is completely out of scope for our course. Okay, let us take a look at So there is a question, what about the break after this module? So let us, I'll talk about all these. So I'll talk about all those aspects, logistics aspects. Before that, if there are questions related to the topic, I'm happy to take them. If not, there are some instructions. Okay, homework. अधोदत्तेषु उदाहरणेषु विप्रतिषेधा कथं वर्तते इति स्पष्टीकृत. So 5 examples. You do not copy the sentences from the slide deck. For each example, explain how the independent execution is there and then how there is a conflict and how that is resolved. Most of the examples are from slide deck. So equayanachi versus sarvadhatuka ardhadhatukayo, I explained. Supicha bahuvachane jhalyet, that is there in the slide deck. Tasminiti nirdishte purvase tasmadityuttarasya, slide deck. Adev parasya anikalshit sarvasya, slide deck. Only one example is new. Tres trayaha and tri chaturoho striyam tisru chatusru. This particular example is there in my commentary of Vipratishedhe Param Karyam. So if you go to Vipratishedhe Param Karyam on Ashtadhyayi, there will be Tres Trayaha and Tri Chaturoho Sriyam Tisru Chatusru. So this is a scope, this is a chance for you to go and read the Vyakhyana and understand it. So explicitly, only one example out of the slide deck is given. That's first question. The second question is this. Ashtadhyayi Parichayaha Asmin Varge Bhavadbhihi एतावत् पर्यन्तं यत्किमपि पठितमस्ति तस्य आधारेण एकं 10 प्रश्नात्मकं MCQ quiz निर्मात. So as an answer to this question, you have to create a 10-mark quiz, multiple choice questions quiz based on whatever is studied in this course by you. So प्रत्येकं प्रश्नस्य 4 अथवा 5 विकल्पाः भवेयुः. सर्वेभ्यः विकल्पेभ्यः एकः एव विकल्पः उचितः स्यात्. उचितः विकल्पः कः इति अपि दर्शनीयम्. You cannot just write down the question paper. You have to tell a correct answer for each question. तस्य कारणम् अपि एकवाक्येन वाक्यद्वयेन वा लेखनीयम्. So don't write the essay. Just tell me that this is the right answer and this is the reasoning for this. So 1 line, 2 line, 3 line, whatever. As minimum as you can. Important point is सामान्य व्याकरणस्य प्रश्नाः नानुमन्यन्ते. You cannot randomly ask grammar questions or literature questions. सर्वेपि प्रश्नाः अष्टाध्यायी परिचयः इति वर्गस्य पाठ्यक्रमम् अनुसृत्य एव भवेयुः. Open the slide decks, open your notes and create the questions. अष्टाध्याय्याः संदर्भेण वर्गे यत्किमपि न पाठितमस्ति तस्य संदर्भेण प्रश्नाः न स्युः. Some of you I know have studied part of Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi earlier from somewhere. Do not ask questions that are not taught in the class. And finally, यदि भवन्तः इच्छन्ति तर्हि अधिकाः प्रश्नाः अपि लेखितुं शक्याः, परन्तु न्यूनातिन्यूनं 10 प्रश्नाः तु अवश्यमेव लेखनीयाः. And when you are creating this quiz, just don't create random questions. I mean, you can always say kakarasya uchcharanasthanam kim, talu murdha kantha oshtadantau, pakarasya uchcharanasthana kim, talu murdha kantha danta oshtau, and so on. You can create 10 questions like this, but that will be stupidity. This exercise is given to you for you to reflect back on what has been learned in the 3 modules so far. So try to be as innovative, try to be as diverse, as witty as possible, but don't make mistakes. Don't write too much tricky questions. Write just the 10 questions and submit as the part of the homework. These are the usual resources. And now what next? Somebody was asking about the break. So yes, there is going to be a break in the classes till end of July. So this is mid-May. So remaining part of May, entire June and almost entire July, there is going to be break in the classes. The next class is on the 31st July or 1st August, depending on where you are. If you are in the US, it will be 31st July. If you are in India, it will be 1st August. So exactly 75 days break is there. And interestingly, you know where this number 75 comes? The number 75 is the number of sutras of the first chapter, 1.1.75. And therefore, in this break, you should study or memorize 1.1 of Ashtadhyayi. What you are supposed to do? This is not a break for you. Please commit to memorizing 1.1 of Ashtadhyayi. Just memorize 1 sutra per day. If you plan it correctly, in 75 days, you will memorize the 75 sutras. So you go to the website, Ashtadhi Parayanam iti asti. Go over there, go to Prathamadhyaye Prathamah Padaha and just click this play button. All the 75 sutras will play. You can change the repetition, you can change the speed, you can simply say, I want to loop only from 1 to 20. So you can simply loop from 1 to 20. Say I want to repeat each sutra 3 times. You set up the parameters on the top and simply click, that particular set of sutras will get repeated. Use this very powerful tool, audio player, to continuously listen to the sutras. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. Everybody of you must memorize these 75 sutras in the break. After we come back, I'm going to add a separate entry on the classroom so that each of you can upload your audios of the sutras that you have memorized. So that's basically during the break. Please commit to memorize 1.1 of Ashtadhyayi. Somebody is asking sutra numbers also. No. All they have to memorize is like this. Vruddhiradai jade gunaha iko guna vruddhi na dhatu lopa ardha dhatu ke kingiti cha, and so on. There are 75 sutras, and then there is one last line. Just memorize it. Even if you don't understand what is it, I will explain what it is after the class, after we come back from the break. So after you complete this, vruddhiryasya chama distad vruddham kedadi nicha eng pracham deshe, there is one line, vruddhiradyantavadavyai bhava pratyasya luk panchadasha iti paniniya sutra pathe prathamadhyaye prathama padaha. This is the line that you have to remember. So that's all that you remember, not the sutra numbers, just the ordering. And I will not randomly pick, I will just basically say start from Vruddhiradich and continuously recite it. It is memorization. You don't have to look in the book and just speak it. You have to thoroughly memorize without looking at book or website. You should be able to memorize it. So use this break for thorough revision. Go over all the material that is covered so far. Make sure to watch each class video at least once, twice probably. Some classes are very difficult. This will help reinforce the concepts and clear any lingering doubts. Yet another suggestion, and I think it's going to be very effective, but I'm going to leave it up to you. Create small groups amongst yourselves and meet once a week during the break. Pick up any of the previous PPTs and take turns in teaching that topic. So you say, I will volunteer for Vipratishdhe Param Karyam PPT. You come and listen to me and find mistakes in what I'm teaching. So take turns in teaching the topic to the group. You will not believe, even after teaching so many years, when I teach Vipratishdhe Param Karyam, when I teach Asiddha Purvatra Siddham in this course, I myself get even more clear understanding of that particular topic. So teaching is one of the most powerful ways to deepen your understanding. So pick up some guinea pigs. It may be people from your group. It may be people who have studied Ashtadhyayi or who are studying Ashtadhyayi somewhere else, and you know your local Sanskrit community and so on. Just bring them together and say, I'm going to teach this. PPT you can use for our course. Every material you can use from our course. Just, it's okay even if you record that session and put it on YouTube. I really don't mind. I'm not taking away anything with me. It's just like for the community. So just try to use this as much as possible so that your knowledge gets enhanced. And finally, don't hesitate to reach out on the group if something is unclear. I am available. I am just traveling. I am not able to, I cannot guarantee internet connection wherever I'm going in the next 2 months. That's why I'm not taking the course. But I will be available on the group. I will answer if there are any pending questions. We have a very vibrant community. We have our community members who regularly answer our questions. So that's one thing. But another very important point is that during this particular break, I'm going to take 2 MCQ exams. The first exam was already done. So now I'm saying exam 2 and exam 3. The exam number 2 is somewhere around mid-June and exam number 3 is somewhere around mid-July. These 2 MCQ exams are exactly like the previous exam. There will be 40 questions in each exam, 1 mark for each question. 4 options will be given. One of the options you have to select as correct option. The interesting point is all the questions in both these exams will be picked up from the answers of the today's homework. I will not create a single question on my own. Whatever questions you send in today's homework, all the questions will be picked up from that answers, from your answer sheet. And obviously, I mean, there are many students, there are like 40 students in the class, 40 multiplied by 10, 400 questions will be sent out. I will not be able to pick up all 400 questions. I'm going to select only 40 plus 40, 80 questions. So if your question is out of the box, if your question is interesting, if your question is thought-provoking, there is a very high chance that I'll select it. If it is kakarasya uchcharanasthanam kim and pakarasya uchcharanasthanam kim, there is a guarantee I will not select it. So, but all the questions will be picked up from the answers of today's homework, and you are allowed to share the answers of your homework to the group. So if all of you work together, you already know the question paper. So I'm not saying do that. I'm just saying it is not a breach of contract. It's perfectly okay if you want to share the answers of only the second part of today's homework. If you want to share it out on the group, that's okay. Eventually, what I want is that you should be able to score good marks and your understanding should improve. So you must score 25 plus marks in each exam to continue with the course. Otherwise, you will not be able to follow what goes ahead. And then this slide I have already explained. I'll stop here. If there are any questions, please raise the hands. If not, we will take a break for 2.5 months in this course. Sudhavalli ji.
Mahoday.
Namaste.
In the Ashtadhyayi, how to find whether the particular Shabda is a Pratyaya and whether there is any list of Pratyaya. There are 7 types of Pratyayas. Whether there is a list of Pratyayas which comes under these groups.
Are you specifically talking about that Itsamyaka part, Ugit, Rudit and so on, or in general?
In general, the Pratyayas.
So in general, the way is to refer to the koshas. So you go to the koshanvesha, where is koshanvesha? And say, for example, Dasharathi, pick up a random. So Dasharathi. And mostly the kosha will give an answer. So Dasharathasya apatya puman ata iya iti sutram. So typically you put up any word and there will be the first line of the Shabda Kalpadrum or Vachaspatyam will give you the sutram and the pratyaya. So mostly it will happen like that.
But whether there is any list of pratyayas under Stri Pratyaya, under this Vikarana Pratyaya, the list of the pratyayas.
Yeah, of course. So if you go to this, so many things I'll tell you now. If you go to the Vyakarana Lekhaha, there is a write-up that I have written, Pratyayadhikaraha. Yes. If you go to this Pratyayadhikaraha, all the Pratyayas, so Sanadi Pratyaya 12 are listed over here. And along with examples, and then Vikarana Pratyaya 21 are all listed over here along with examples and so on. So Ting Pratyaya 18 are all listed over here. So all Pratyayas are listed over here. Okay. So there is a there is no better interface on the website right now. Maybe at some point in time I'll develop it. There is an interface for Krut and Tadhita. So if you go to the website and if you go to Prakaranashaha Adhyanam, there is a Krudanta Prakaranam which will have the Krut Pratyayavali. And similarly, if you go to the Tadhita Prakaranam, there is a sheet. If you go to this Tadhita Prakarana Vishishtani Karapatrani, there is a Tadhita Pratyayavali. So this way you have.
Yes, the Tadhita Pratyaya.
So yeah, so in Tadhita Prakaranam, you go to Tadhita Prakarana Vishishtani Karapatrani, click here, and there is a Tadhita Pratyayavali. If you click over there, is a whole list of Pratyayas with the Drishya Rupa and what is the Itsamyaka member of that Pratyaya. Everything is there. Okay. Okay. Any other question? If not, Samapayamaha. Okay, so no questions. Samapayamaha. We'll meet again in the last week of July or first week of August. अष्टाध्यायी जगन्माता यस्य चित्तात् समुत्थिता वेदानामुपकाराय तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. शब्द ब्रह्म समाराध्य कृतवान्यो विलक्षणं सर्वाश्चर्यमिदं शास्त्रं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. येन धौता गिरः पुंसां विमलैः शब्दवारिभिः तमश्चाज्ञानजं भिन्नं तस्मै पाणिनिये नमः. धन्यवादः.